Most people know that colonialism was bad. I don't think I'm breaking any news here, but the effects of this practice are less known. That's my goal, to explain how something that ended over 50 years ago is still having an enormous impact on an entire continent. I will specifically concentrate on colonialism in Sub-Saharan Africa for a few reasons. First, the subject of colonialism is humongous, and if I concentrate on colonialism in the world, this video would go on forever. And I don't want to waste your time or my time. And also because this subject is very personal to me. With that out of the way, let's begin. First, let's talk about the economy. I know boring, but trust me, it'll get interesting. Colonialism has had a vast impact on the entire continent of Africa. One of the major things colonialism influenced are the economies of these African nations. European countries took land from the indigenous population for mining and commercial farms. The European colonizers used the African population as labor for the farms and mines and treated them poorly. Imagine somebody coming to your house, taking over your house, and forcing you to work as their servant. I don't think that's very fun. The working conditions were abhorrent, and the men had to leave their villages to go to the colonizers' land just to make it by. Also, the Europeans changed the complete structure of agriculture. They mostly grew cash crops like cocoa, coffee, and cotton instead of food. Sadly, the wealth accrued from the sales of these crops barely trickled down to the native population, kind of like Reagan's America. It also created a dependency on minerals and cash crops for the economy while depleting the resources of the continent and doing so much more damage. Imagine forcing people to work on horrible conditions for minimal wages. It couldn't be me. I'm glad we've just grown as a society and I've stopped doing this practice. Another reason why Africa's economy has been affected so poorly by colonialism is that the Europeans did not introduce concepts like property rights, unlike in America or Australia, even though that doesn't exist, and you cannot convince me of it. Their mindset was just on the extraction of resources. This strategy was most clear in the practice of plantation, where the Europeans controlled the land by forcing the native population to sell their labor to the plantation owners in farming, mining, and other activities. Even in places where most of the land was owned by Africans, the service sector was dominated by colonizers who monopolized it. I think this quote from Garrett Austin really explains the problem. From the perspectives of both dependency theory and rational choice institutionalism, the original sin of colonialism in Africa was that it did not introduce a full-blooded capitalist system based upon private property and thereby generating the pressures towards competition and accumulation necessary to drive self-sustained economic growth. Now, let's talk about the political effects of colonialism. First of all, most communities in Africa were decentralized, which meant that rulers did not have the power to intimidate or repress their population. However, during colonialism, the colonial powers were more centralized and used and amplified the local power structure to maintain the rule. This created a situation where local leaders concentrated power. Also, when colonial powers left sub-Saharan Africa, they did not protect the democracy of the colonies, and hitherto, during colonial rule, they put repressive laws in place which were kept after independence. They even rigged elections to put allies in power after leaving. And no, I'm not talking about the 2020 election. This led to unstable governments ruled by authoritarian men. One thing that all colonial powers did in one way or another was to show favoritism to certain ethnic groups during the administration of the colony. This technique was also used for civil servants, and the groups that were chosen were often ethnic minorities who got preferential treatment over other groups in the colony. This would often seed animosity between different groups, unlike in the US, where everyone is treated equally. In sub-Saharan Africa, this would often be used like when the British would favor freed slaves in Sierra Leone or the Gambia, or when the French would show preferential treatment to groups on the coast, in the colonies of Benin or the Ivory Coast. So the impact each colonizer had on the politics of the country varies from nation to nation, but in general, it had an enormous impact on the colony after independence, and it usually resulted in authoritarian, unstable nations. Finally, let's talk maps, or to be more specific, borders. The way Europeans separated the colonies caused borders to not make any sense. Ethnic groups were separated arbitrarily, and this led to a multitude of wars of succession. From the Berlin Conference onwards, the African borders didn't really respect the cultures, beliefs, and histories of the people living on the land. For example, the Congo people once belonged to a unified kingdom, but were split between France and the Republic of the Congo, Belgium and Dr. Congo, and Portugal and Angola. And another example of poor borders and terrible governing is Cameroon, whose ethnic groups are similar culturally, but due to the separation of the country between France and the UK after World War One, created conflict and division in the nation because of the difference of language between French and English. Similarly, the Hausa Fulani, Igbos and Yoruba in Nigeria are all very distinct and very different, but they were forced to be under the same colony under the British. That's almost as bad as living with your roommate, especially the one who never washes the dishes and who somehow leaves his dirty socks in your room and you think it's on purpose, but you can't prove it. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah. Several of these borders have led to groups starting conflicts in Africa, such like the Somalis, an ethnic group who have fought a multitude of wars to reunite their territory, which at this moment are separated between the countries of Somalia, the disputed territory of Somaliland, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. Djibouti. Another group is the Tuareg, who are caught between West African countries of Mali and Niger. This has sometimes led to population spillage, where smaller ethnic groups are targeted by central governments and pushed out of the country. In conclusion, hopefully you learned how colonialism has had an enormous impact on Sub-Saharan Africa to this day, even though it ended decades ago. Now I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Peace.